So there is hope.
There is hope.
That is great to hear. That's what everyone needs to hear. There's hope. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Brooke Scheller, Doctor of Clinical Nutrition, Certified Nutrition Specialist, and the founder of the Functional Sobriety Approach. Hi, Dr. Brooke. I'm so glad to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me. As I mentioned in our little getting started moment here, that I'm really excited you're covering this topic. And I think it's so important for your listeners and your viewers to dive deeper into this one. It's a little bit taboo for some, but really, really an important topic to discuss.
We're so excited to learn more about the relationship between alcohol and sleep. So let's jump right in. What motivated you to start educating people about alcohol's impact on wellness, including sleep?
Well, thank you for asking this question. I often share my story and I talk a lot about my story in my book. I used to be a big drinker and I was one of those who really became interested in the ways that alcohol potentially had a positive effect on health. But it really wasn't until my own experience and journey in cutting back and going alcohol free that I really saw this opportunity for us to talk more about the influence that alcohol has on health. And I think for so long, one of the challenges is that we've believed that there are health benefits of drinking. And I think that's especially true when it comes to sleep, that there are so many people that believe that alcohol helps with their sleep, but they aren't aware that there are some ways that alcohol may be having a negative impact on sleep over time. And so it's become really important for me and a huge passion of mine to really talk about alcohol in a way that makes it a topic we can all discuss openly, without much judgment or criticism around people's choices and actions, but really to help them choose how to drink, how much to drink, and if maybe cutting back or quitting is best for them to improve these different dynamics of their health, including sleep.
That's fantastic and so grateful for your work. One of my questions for you is it sounds like many people might just underestimate the impact of alcohol on their sleep. Is that factual?
I would agree. I think that many of us can relate to waking up and feeling sluggish after, especially if we've had maybe excessive amounts of alcohol. We can all relate to that next day, maybe hangover feeling, or even just kind of feeling a little bit fatigued, more fatigued than normal. But I do think in the long term, we really underestimate what it is doing to our sleep. And this isn't just to say that it influences our sleep the night that we drink, but the more that we drink on a consistent basis, it can actually have an influence on that sleep over the long term.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. What are some of the most common sleep complaints that you hear from people who drink regularly?
Well, for certain, a lot of folks experience broken sleep. So they might feel like they wake up a lot in the middle of the night, that maybe they fall asleep quickly, but they don't really feel rested the next day. And really, because of the way that alcohol can influence cortisol and melatonin, a lot of people find that over the long term, even if initially alcohol helped them sleep, that they have more difficulty in kind of staying asleep or feeling more rested the next day.
Yeah, no, something that's on my mind is a lot of people, they reach for this nightcap thinking, oh, it will help me unwind before bed. Like, why do you think that this belief has stuck around? And it sounds like it's not accurate, but if you have any insights there, would love your thoughts.
Yeah, well, it really gets into the why and the what's happening to our sleep cycles, to our brain's neurotransmitters, to our stress hormones, our sleep hormones after drinking. And, one of the big things is that it does have an initial sedative effect. Most of us can relate to having a couple of drinks and kind of more easily falling asleep. So, with that being said, I think many of us kind of hinge on that as a tool to help us sleep while really not being aware of how much it influences sleep after the fact. There's less of that conversation, I think, in the discussion about, well, what happens after you initially fall asleep? And I think because of the influence on neurotransmitters like GABA. GABA is one of our body's relaxing neurotransmitters, it can kind of give us that flood and that feeling of relaxation and relief that many of us associate with being able to more naturally fall asleep.
That is so fascinating. And then can you just like, I think on a deep level, explain what happens inside the body when we drink at night? How specifically like it interacts and changes our sleep cycles?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, initially it has more of that sedative effect. But as alcohol is being metabolized by the body when we're sleeping, that can have an influence on those neurotransmitters where our sleep actually becomes lighter, it becomes choppy, it becomes less restorative. We are technically asleep, but we're not necessarily getting into those deeper sleep patterns where a lot of the restoration and the healing happens. And so, again, even though it kind of initially makes us feel like we can fall asleep during that metabolic process of alcohol being metabolized from the body, a lot of people notice that they might even wake up a few times in the middle of the night and feel anxious or they feel wired. That is not an uncommon thing that happens. And that has to do with, again, the processing and the changes that happen to things like cortisol, our body's stress hormone, and the way that that kind of influences our melatonin production, our, kind of sleep wake cycles, if you will.
I'm wondering, are there like subtle or sneaky ways that it disrupts people's sleep that they might not realize?
Yeah, well, I also want to touch on REM sleep because REM sleep is one of our most important parts of sleep. If when we get less REM sleep, we might find ourselves feeling more irritable, more anxious. Next day we might have poor focus, we might feel more emotional kind of swings or instability. And that REM sleep is really, really fragmented and suppressed when we are drinking. It doesn't allow us to get into this deeper state of healing or restorative sleep. So it can be really problematic as it relates to what I look at as the vicious cycle of why we drink. We drink because we oftentimes have difficulty with relaxation. We have difficulty with maybe our emotions throughout the day. But interestingly enough, if we're in that kind of cycle or pattern where we're not getting enough of that REM sleep, it can really be a contributor to why we feel that way and why we might turn to a drink. And really, because of the ways that alcohol influences cortisol, our body's stress hormone, many of us think that alcohol helps with stress. And one of the first things I always tell people is that alcohol increases our cortisol, it makes our stress worse. That, again, is really one of these big misnomers in that we kind of feel like, again, it has this initial influence to stress or this initial influence on sleep, followed by this more exaggerated, almost intolerance, if you will, to that stress or to that sleep. We end up feeling like even if the next day we don't feel a quote unquote hangover, we haven't had enough to really feel this intense symptom or detox of alcohol, if you will, you may still feel like you're more sluggish, you're more foggy, you're more groggy. You might have cravings for sugar, carbohydrates. You might have difficulty focusing. You might, have more of these fluctuations in mood. And I think a lot of these things we think of as quote unquote normal. And we don't necessarily look at how alcohol may be playing a role or influencing that. So that's one big thing for me is I think there's a lot of ways, sneaky ways that alcohol affects our body as a whole, especially sleep. And it's one of those things that by changing our relationship to it or by changing how much or how often we drink, it can have a really, really big impact on the way that we feel.
That is so enlightening. And I think that that just leads me into the next set of topics that I want to cover, which is what is the fix for this? And, for someone who wants to improve their sleep, but they still enjoy social drinking, what are some realistic first steps that they can take?
It's very unrealistic that, you hear one discussion about alcohol and, you quick flip all of your habits and make big changes. However, what I think is really amazing in today's day and age and how much more we're bringing alcohol into the wellness conversation is really just starting to learn more about the way that it influences you. So I always suggest to people, if you're interested in this topic, if you're interested in hearing more about alcohol reduction, look into other books or podcasts or topics on alcohol reduction, because just by educating yourself, it's going to be really, really useful in starting to make some of those changes. And I know it can feel like an overwhelming topic or an overwhelming thing to change. But again, just by maybe listening to another podcast or reading a book like mine, that can really start moving you in the right direction.
That's really some great advice. One thing I'm curious about is we are the company Better Sleep. Are there any tools or features in our app, the Better Sleep app, that you think might be useful for people to help improve their sleep while cutting back on alcohol?
I think absolutely all of the tools that are in the app are really fabulous for this, because I think there's two pieces. One is by looking at the influences to your own sleep. So by looking at your history at your sleep tracker, again, looking at data and seeing, are you getting into REM sleep? Are you having maybe more broken sleep? That, of course, is going to help you understand more about your own sleep. And you can do little research experiments, if you will, on yourself. What happens on a night that I don't drink versus a night that I do drink? Or what happens on a week that I don't drink versus my normal, where maybe you have a few drinks per week? So, starting to look at those metrics and that data can be really useful in seeing how it's actually influencing your body. So, as I mentioned, when seeing my heart rate stay up all night long, it really caused some concern for me and caused me to want to look into why that was and make some changes to my habits. But also, of course, the resistance I think that many of us get is, well, I struggle with falling asleep. So if I don't drink, how am I going to get to sleep? And that's really where we see tools like guided meditations become really, really beneficial, because it can start to tune our brain into some of those more relaxing brain states so that we can fall asleep more easily. And I always tell people that usually sleep repairs itself fairly quickly. So if you're someone who's really used alcohol to help with that sedation and falling asleep, I find that clients within usually 2, 3 weeks, those sleep regulations start to happen and things start to normalize fairly quickly. But there are a lot of other tools, like using certain nutrients like magnesium, or herbs that help with sleep, like valerian root, that can also be really useful as well.
Wow. So I think, what I hear you say is that people, when they cut back on alcohol, like how soon can they start seeing the impact? It sounds like from what you're saying, it's fairly soon.
Yeah, I would say within a few weeks, you can really start to see things and start to feel that normalization in those sleep patterns, especially if you've used alcohol to kind of help kick you into sleep or kind of move things into that sleep cycle. And that's where I think some of the tracking features can be useful, because you can see over the course of what period of time you might see that difference. And again, while maybe there are a few weeks where things are a little broken or irregular, if you will, that usually within a few weeks that starts to normalize.
That is that is great to hear. That's what everyone needs to hear. There's hope.
There is hope for sure.
So if someone already has improved their sleep by reducing alcohol, what's something that they can do to sustain that progress long term?
Yeah, well, I think again, really looking into what are our goals around not only sleep, but our brain. Sleep is a huge, huge, huge impact on our mood and our emotions. So, if you're someone who struggles a lot with mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, again, things like irritability, even cravings, all of those can have to do with our brain health, how our brain is functioning. Sleep is a really, really important part of that. But also, even things like looking deeper into our nutrition. I'm a doctor of nutrition, so I would be remiss if I didn't come on and tell us how important nutrients and proteins are for our sleep and our serotonin and our dopamine and all of our brain's neurotransmitters to function regularly. So I think that what we really want to do to sustain that long-term practice, aside from getting that good sleep, is making sure we're giving our body and our brain more of what it needs, like those nutrients.
So important. Well, I would love it if you would please summarize your philosophy on balancing enjoyment and sleep health in one sentence.
Ooh, one sentence is always challenging for me, but I would say that, I think it's so important to remember that just because we've done something for a long time doesn't mean that it's something that we need to continue doing, or that it's paying us or doing us any service. So I think when it comes to drinking and sleep, it oftentimes becomes one of those habits that we just don't even really think we can or should change. But I do really think that when it comes to our health and looking at how we want to feel, who we want to be, that making sure that that plays into our enjoyment as well. That it's not just about drinking and having fun, that you can still cultivate positive relationships and experiences without necessarily having alcohol as part of that.
This is so helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Brooke. It's like this has just been so immensely helpful and insightful. You can learn more about Dr. Brooke Scheller and her work at brookscheller.com and explore her programs such as the Alcohol Free Nutrition Edge, the Mood Makeover Program, 30 days alcohol free. You can also download her 3-day meal plan for free. And don't forget to follow Better Sleep for more tips, insights, and conversations to help you rest easier. Thank you so much, Dr. Brooke.
Thank you for having me.
Until the next episode, please be gentle with yourself and remember, better sleep is always possible.